in Sheol, nor allow your Holy One to see corruption. So here's what we have. Here is a precursor to the fact that the Messiah is going to ultimately die, but he will go into Sheol, which is the underworld, the place of the departed dead, parallel to the pit and the grave, but he will not see corruption. So your Holy One will not see corruption. Now I'm going to take you to some other verses here. I want to bring these up here just a moment and read these to you. This is This is 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 6. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 6. Very important passage. It says this, 1 Samuel 2, 6. Yahweh kills and gives life, brings down to Sheol and raises up. So resurrection is built into the warp and woof fabric of the Hebrew Scriptures. Then it says this in Psalm 139, verse 8. Psalm 139, verse 8 says this, if I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I lie down in Sheol, you are there. In other words, there's no place that you can go outside the purview and presence of God. And in fact, if you go on to read there like we did, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption. Now you might be thinking as you read this that we were talking about David. Acts chapter 2, and we're going to pick up the reading in verse 22. Acts chapter 2, verse 22. I read you Psalm 16 on purpose because it's going to be used in this text. And look what he says. Men of Israel, hear these words, Yeshua of Nazareth, a man attested by God to you by miracles, wonders, and signs, which God did through him in your midst, as you yourself also know. Him being delivered by the determined purpose and foreknowledge of God, you have taken by lawless hands, have crucified and put to death, whom God raised up. Remember, he's able to raise up, having loosed the pains of death, because it was not possible that he should be held by it. For David says concerning him, I foresaw the Lord always before my face, for he is at my right hand that I may not be shaken. Therefore my heart rejoiced and my tongue was glad. Moreover, my flesh also will rest in hope. Now look what he says here, verse 27. For you will not abandon my nephesh to Hades. Sheol, Hades, Sheol, Septuagint translated Sheol as Hades. Nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption. You have made known to me the ways of life. You will make me full of joy in your presence. And he says this in verse 29. Men and brethren, let me speak freely to you of the patriarch David, that he is both dead and buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. Therefore, being a prophet, and knowing that God had sworn with an oath to him that of the fruit of his body, according to the flesh, he would raise up the Messiah to sit on his throne. He, foreseeing this, spoke concerning the resurrection of the Messiah, that his soul was not abandoned in Hades, nor did his flesh see corruption. This Yeshua God has raised up, of which we are all witnesses. Therefore, being exalted to the right hand of God, and having received from the Father the promise of the Holy Spirit, he poured out this which you now see and hear. And notice how he has, here you have God, you have Yeshua, Messiah, and you have the Spirit. He poured out that which you now see and hear. For David, now look at this, for David did not ascend into the heavens, but he himself says, the Lord said to my Lord, he's quoting Psalm 110:1, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. Therefore, let all the house of Israel know assuredly that Elohim, or God, has made this Yeshua, whom you crucified, both Lord and Messiah. That's high Christology. And they're pulling from Psalm 16. He quotes it twice here in this text. He says, it was not about David. David's dead, buried, and we have his tomb. We could go visit him. David did not descend into heaven. He said the Holy One would not see corruption. Book of Acts makes it clear that this was about the ultimate Holy One. This was about the Messiah. So that's important because we encounter Sheol in our text of Numbers today, chapter 16. Sheol had compartments to it. You had multiple compartments to it, just like you have in Hades. So Greek uses the word Hades, and in Hebrew we use the word Sheol. It's the place of the departed dead. The irony is that there's times in this Sheol where people can talk to those from the other side. It seems like they have the ability to, even though they're dead, they can communicate in some ways, and the scriptures talk about this, they can communicate with those who are still alive. Which is very, very interesting. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but just hold on to that thought. I gave you a sheet of paper that says on the front of it, how the Davidic covenant of 2 Samuel unites with the Abrahamic covenant. I'm not going to go through this, but I hope you will take and do a cross comparison with the scriptures I've given you and the little English sentence that goes with it, and look at how the Abrahamic covenant and the Davidic covenant have these things in common. Because we need to think of the covenants as not separate individual things, but as pieces of the same pie. They're slices of the same pie. In the progress of Revelation, as we're moving from Abraham, there's 4 covenants. 4 of them are identified with individuals, so to speak. We talk about names. For instance, Noah, then Abraham, then Moses, then David, and then the new covenant, Jeremiah 31. But 4 of the 5 are associated with an individual, a prominent individual in the Hebrew Scriptures. But I want you to see how the Abrahamic covenant, which is incredibly pivotal, and then the Davidic covenant, which is also a major pillar in the Hebrew Scriptures, are connected. They're interconnected. So that, like I said, they're pieces of the same pie. I don't have time to explore this with you, but this is from the book called Mission in the Old Testament. If you get a chance to read it, it's a short book by a good friend, Walter Kaiser, Old Testament scholar. Amazing book. Really goes into the backgrounds of the Hebrew Scriptures, role of Israel to be the light to the nations, and how God was drawing in the nations all along. Anyway, you have this. I hope you'll take it at home, sit down with your Bible, and go through these. All right. That brings us to our text today, Numbers chapter 16, the rebellion of Korah. All right. So I'm going to be doing some reading here, and then I'll stop, and we'll let you ask some questions, and we'll make some comments. Last week's Torah section was like the calm before the storm. Just when you thought that all the rebellion that could happen had subsided, enter chapter 16. With all the complaints and grumblings, one wonders how Moses kept his wits about him. From chapters 11 through 14, Moshe had experienced one rebellion after the other, to the point that even his own family, Miriam and Aaron, wonder aloud if Moses is capable of leading the nation of Israel into the promised land. With all that has happened before and all the provision the people have seen God provide, we enter chapter 16 with Moshe once again under attack, and this time by a priestly family. It was his own family that attacked him in chapter 12, and the people have been attacking him verbally in between and before. The leader of the rebellion against Moses is a man named Korach, who by descent was a Levite from the family of Kohath. According to the rabbis, Korah's complaint is that as the eldest son of the second oldest son of Kohath, he should have been given control of the family estate. Instead, that distinction went to Elzaphan, son of Uziel. the youngest son of Kohath. Throughout the Torah, we've seen and observed that just because the culture says the firstborn is to be the leader, that God in his sovereign control chooses whoever he desires. God will not be manipulated by the culture. Korah reasoned that since Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam had political control over the tribal confederation, that at least he should be allowed to run the family business. As a descendant of Levi, the Kohathites had the privilege of carrying the implements of the tabernacle whenever the people traveled. One can read in detail that what the Kohathites were to do for the tabernacle in Numbers chapter 4. Joining Korah in his rebellion is Dathan, Aviram, On, and 250 people from the community. Interestingly, some of the people are called men of name, meaning nobility. In Hebrew scripture, to have a name is important, while those of unimportance are left nameless. In Job 38, the scoundrels in that text are called sons without a name. If God leaves you nameless in a text, that's sometimes an indication of your being marginalized. We saw this in Ruth, where the man is called Peloni Almoni. We don't know who he is, Mr. So-and-so. Everybody in Ruth has a name. Everybody has a name, and yet you get to chapter 4, and Mr. Peloni Almoni has no name. I mean, we know the names of everybody in the book of Ruth just about. But we get there, and there's no name. So you are a son without a name. The first accusation of Korah against Moses is that Moses has, quote, gone too far. You have too much power and prestige. The second accusation against Moses is that Moses considers himself better than anyone else in the congregation. Both of these accusations are aimed at the attitude and motives and do not address the gooder aspects of Moses' leadership. In response, Moses likewise does two things. First, he falls on his face before God as a way of humbling himself before God. And second, Moses issues a challenge to Korah and his followers to find out who exactly the Lord has placed in leadership over the people. For the next few minutes, I want to dissect the anatomy of their rebellion. Each of the elements comes from the text and could be applied to rebellion at different levels. First, rebellion begins in the heart with the belief that leadership is not God-ordained. The fact is that it was God who had called Moses to lead the people and not Korah. The people of Israel belonged to God, and it was his call as to who would lead the nation. This leads to my second point. Rebellion against God-ordained leadership is really rebellion against God. This may sound harsh, but it's the hard truth. Verse 11 of our text, Numbers 16, states, "Truly it is against the Lord that you and all your company have banded together." Third, those in rebellion usually seek others who are like-minded to enter the rebellion with them. Seldom are those who rebel content to do alone. The rebellious typically surround themselves with what Proverbs calls companions of fools. The rebellious typically avoid anyone who might disagree with their point of view. Fourthly, rebellion is built on a distortion of reality. Rebellion is usually built on half-truths, exaggeration, and outright lies. Notice in our portion today, verses 12 to 14, and the incredible distortion of reality. The claim is made that Moses brought them from a land flowing with milk and honey only to lead them into the wilderness to die. The reality is that they were prisoners with no hope of parole until God sent Moses to deliver them from bondage. Rebellion had so infiltrated their minds of the rebellious that they call Egypt the Promised Land, and the Promised Land Egypt. In verse 14, we find the thematic connection between our Torah and Haftorah text. In chapter 16, the idiom, gouge out the eyes, means what we would call hoodwink, or pull the wool over his eyes. The basic meaning is to intentionally fool someone with whatever means available. In our Haftorah portion, the gouging out of the eyes is not an idiom, but we will return to that a little bit later. So in Hebrew idiom, you can use this phrase to gouge out the eyes to mean to try to hoodwink somebody, to try to pass something off, to try to get it by their sight. Finally, rebellion ultimately leads to the judgment of God on those who persist in their rebellion. With the obvious use of anthropomorphic language, the earth opens its mouth and swallows alive Korah and the major leaders in the rebellion. Fire from heaven, possibly lightning, consumes the 250 people that had joined hands with Korah in the rebellion. With the swiftness and certainty that no one could deny, God demonstrated that Moses was his choice to lead the people. We are told that rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft or sorcery in 1 Samuel 15. The demonic nature of rebellion is such that God will punish it in his time, but it will be punished. Okay, I'll stop there. Questions, comments? Yes. Yeah, it's a good question. I think that I've not thought of how they are. I think that's the issue, is control, is that witchcraft seeks to manipulate and control God, and rebellion seeks to manipulate and control God. It says, I'm not going to go with your way, I'm going to go my way, which is control. It's not surrender, it's control. And witchcraft would do the same thing, just using different means. But it's ultimately rebellion. Being, I'm not going to go your way, God. I'm not going to do your way. I'm going to go my way. I'm going to use means outside of you to ascertain truth or ascertain what is right. And so I think I think that's the connection and the correlation. But he actually says it's worse. That rebellion is like the sin of witchcraft. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, he goes to they call her the witch of Endor. Saul had put out all the mediums, which was a good thing, although obviously not everybody had gone. So he asked his own people, he said, the Lord would not speak to him in dreams, visions, or with Urim and Thummim, right? So God has shut off the tap in communicating with Saul. And Saul's like, well, by the way, so I'm glad you bring this up. So he says to his people, is there anybody we can go see to kind of get a word from the Lord? And his people say, yeah, well, there is this one woman. She's kind of, she didn't really heed your directive to shut everything down. So Saul disguises himself, takes a servant or two with him, and he goes to see this woman. Now, she initially doesn't know who he is. And she says, but you know that Saul said we're not supposed to be doing this. And he goes, yeah, I know, but go ahead and do it anyway. And she says, what do you want? She says, I want you to bring up Samuel. You want me to bring up Samuel? Where's Samuel? Samuel's died. So this is one of those odd passages. Now, remember, he's in Sheol, and she says, okay, I'll do it. Now, I don't know. Here's what's interesting. I don't know whether she's actually a fraud in the past, and she's made her living off being a fraud. Like, who do you want me to contact for you? And then they go, well, I want you to contact Bob. And you go, okay, well, I'll contact Bob for you. I'll tell you what, I'm talking to him right now. And she does this hocus pocus, she does this kind of a, play a game with you. And then, she takes some money from you and tells you what you want to hear. Okay? We don't know. I'm concerned with some of these people that do this stuff because, not concerned, I think it's problematic. Because here's the other part. So they're either a fraud or they're tapped into the demonic, which I'm more likely to hold to than the other, although there could be a little bit of both. But what's interesting is she says, okay, I got Samuel here. Now, she seems to me surprised that Samuel has come there. Samuel looks like Samuel, talks like, in fact, Samuel says, I'm a little peeved that you brought me back up and you're talking to me. Saul recognizes that from her description, he says, "Oh, that's Samuel." And she's like, "Who?" He's like, "It's the prophet I needed to talk to." Then Saul says, "What's going to happen?" And Samuel says, "I already told you what's going to happen. I already had this conversation with you. Same thing I said before is going to happen. Nothing's changed." Okay, and Samuel goes off the scene. So whatever's going on there, but remember I said earlier that people from the other side can still talk? You get this in Luke 16. Luke 16 refers to Hades as also the bosom of Abraham. Okay, and this comes from intertestamental Jewish literature. One of these days I'm going to sit down with you guys and we're just going to go through all intertestamental literature that deals with the afterlife, because there's a lot of it. Numbers of texts that deal, and especially Enoch. Enoch has a number of things to say about the afterlife. Jewish literature that deals with what they believed about the afterlife. So we'll go through that. That's coming up. I want to go through that with you because there's a lot there. Bottom line is that this woman, this witch of Endor, she's able to bring Samuel up. And he tells Saul exactly what he told him before. Doesn't change the message at all. It's the same message I had when I was alive. Okay. So now, these people go down into Sheol. The earth opens up and swallows them. Just like a sinkhole, and all of a sudden they just fall into the hole, the earth covers back over them. God says, "I don't want anybody messing with Moses." We already had this conversation. Moses didn't even want to be the leader of Israel. You go back to the beginning of this, Moses was like, "Look, I'm not a good speaker. I got a heavy tongue. I really don't want to do this. I'm happy here in Midian. I'm married, everything's going great. Leave me alone." God says, "Moses, you're the man. I didn't invest 80 years in you. You're going to go there and deliver my people." All right. I'm not a good speaker. Fine, then Aaron can speak for you. Aaron becomes the first Kohen HaGadol, the first high priest. But Aaron's a problem. We've witnessed that. Chapter 12. All right, now let's go to the Haftorah portion, which is our text from Samuel. Turning our attention to the Haftorah section, I mentioned earlier that the thematic connection between the two sections is the idea of having one's eyes gouged out. Without the recent discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, our Haftorah portion was greatly enhanced with the scroll known as 4Q Samuel A. Both the Qumran scrolls and Josephus. By the way, Josephus has a lot to say about death and life and afterlife. We need to read him as well, and we'll do that when we get to it. So, both the Qumran scrolls and Josephus have a substantial paragraph preceding what is in our modern translations. The added portion reads, "Nachash, king of the Ammonites, oppressed the Gadites and the Reubenites viciously. He put out the right eye of all of them and brought fear and trembling on Israel. None of the Israelites in the region beyond the Jordan remained whose right eye Nachash, king of the Ammonites, did not put out, except 7,000 men who escaped from the Ammonites and went to Jabesh Gilead." That portion is in the 4Q Samuel portion of Samuel. That is not in most of our translations. And it was also in Josephus. So we have two sources that mention this, which is fascinating. One of the things I mentioned earlier this week on Facebook, on my page, was the idea of translations. And one of the points in there was to talk about the Septuagint and also to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. That we need to have the Dead Sea Scrolls because they bring in a lot of information that we lost in translation and lost in manuscripts. So it's good to have this information. In Samuel, the gouging out of the right eye, he says, "I'm going to gouge out everybody's right eye." What does that do? To gouge out the right eye means you're not going to be a warrior. It distorts everything. It distorts your balance. It distorts your ability to shoot a bow and arrow or a slingshot. Because what do you do when you shoot? You close one eye anyway, right? Well, if one eye is already closed, you close both of them. What are you doing? You're shooting in the dark. Okay? So it messes everything up. And by the way, this is the terms of surrender. The terms of surrender is let me gouge out all the right eyes, everybody's right eye. How many of you want to sign up for that? So Israel says, give us some time. This is very early on in Saul's kingship. And Saul does well here. He's able to deliver the people. But this Nakash is a foreshadowing of the ultimate Nakash, of the ultimate serpent. This is really about the defeat of the Nakash is a precursor or a telegraphing, if you will, of the ultimate destruction of the serpent. And it comes to us here in Samuel again. So as we're working our way through the texts, there's little hints that there will be a destruction of the Nakash, of the serpent. Just like we had telegraphed to us in Genesis 3:15, that this serpent will bruise the heel, but you will crush the head. This big picture keeps coming to the forefront. We have it again later on with David. Now this one's a little more subtle, but if you listen to Saul, I've mentioned this in the past, if you listen to the description of Goliath, Goliath is described as if he is wearing snake-like armor. He's described as if he's a serpent. And what does David do? David is able to destroy him, but also rushes up and cuts off his head. A messianic foreshadowing of the destruction of the serpent, where King David takes off the head of the serpent, just as it was prophesied and foreshadowed in Genesis 3:15. All of this keeps coming back. Okay? All right. With these lines now in our text, we can see why the people of Jabesh-Gilead had reason to fear the threat of Nakash. Given a 7-day reprieve, the people of Jabesh-Gilead send messengers to the newly anointed king for military help. Saul, who seems less than regal, plowing with oxen, takes the oxen and cuts them up. By sending a piece of the oxen to every tribe, Saul is saying that the tribe that does not come to the aid of its fellow Israelites will suffer the same demise as the slaughtered oxen. We saw this at the end of the book of Judges. You were supposed to slaughter an animal and send the 12 parts of the animal to the tribes to say, come to the battle. Judges 19 is so horrific that they cut up a woman into 12 pieces and send her out to all the tribes. It just shows you how debauched it was in the time period of the Judges. A little bit better here, we slaughter an animal. With at least 330,000 soldiers mustered, Saul marched on the men of Jabesh-Gilead. The men of Jabesh-Gilead led the Ammonites to believe that on the next morning they would peaceably surrender, so that the army of Saul would find the army of the Ammonites with their guard down. So thorough and complete was the victory over the Ammonites that when those who survived fled, they did so without the help of their fellow soldiers. In both the Torah and Haftorah, the leader of the Israelites is faced with a challenge. Moshe from within and Saul from without. In both situations, God confirmed the established leader by giving victory to the Israelites. With Moshe, God miraculously destroyed those who had risen up against him. While with Saul, God saved the people of Jabesh-Gilead, which further established Saul as king. One of my favorite ways of interpreting a text is to look at what other authors of the inspired text had to say about a text. That's what we should always be doing. Remember what we said, the Bible is full of itself. The Bible is always talking. There's this inner dialogue going on within the text. It's always talking to us, and the biblical writers are aware of each other, and they're talking to each other across the text. In Psalm 106, 16 to 18, we find this psalmist calling the rebels of number 16 envious and wicked. In our apostolic reading, the book of Jude warns against false teachers The description of the false teachers comes from the Torah. False teachers follow the way of Cain. Listen to this. They follow the way of Cain, which is what? Empty worship. Empty worship. Cain was guilty of selfishness and greed, despising those who followed God's command. Secondly, false teachers follow Balaam's error, empty message. Balaam prophesied, but only for personal gain or profit. Finally, false teachers are like Korah, empty loyalty. Korah was wicked and envious of God's ordained leadership. And in the final analysis, he destroyed himself and others. Got to watch. Watch these people. The difficulty is this. You don't get to watch people who are on the radio and TV. It's difficult. You don't get to watch their lives because all you see them is behind a radio or a TV. You don't really know what their lives are like. So it's a gamble supporting them. You don't know what they're like. You just have no way of knowing unless you know them personally, but you know their name and you know their ministry. But behind the scenes, it's hard to tell what they're really like. And oftentimes we find out that behind the scenes, things are not as picturesque as they're made to look on the TV or the radio. And sometimes people support these ministries with large sums of money only to find out that they're like Cain, they're like Korah, and they're like Balaam. There's problems with each of these. So Jude says, look at these people, look at these teachers. Look at Cain, look at Balaam, and look at Korah. And evaluate them with these criteria. What's their message? What's their motive? Try to ascertain these things. It's important. Very important. All right, any questions or comments? You guys have been good at listening. Now it's your turn. A lot of rebellion in the book of Judges. A lot of rebellion. But I'm glad you asked the question about witchcraft because I think that corollary is there, that it's to seek to usurp the authority of God through human means. Not going to the Lord. That would be to do an end run around him. Everybody's quiet. Any comments, questions? Your thoughts. Yeah, Alan. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it happens today. Absolutely. So the question was, that Korah comes against Moses, and Moses is God's appointed leader for the people. Clearly, God is the one who's chosen him, and God's been the one who's guided the people through all this. And Moses, when Moses turns to God, God answers him, and God speaks to him. And it was God who chose Moses. Anyway, he was saying, today, when you have leadership, does that happen? Do people come against the leader? And I think, the answer would be yes. That there's, by the way, this is why, let's go back to the Ten Commandments. The God-ordained leadership of children is parents. So what does he say? Honor your father and your mother, which is two things. Number one, when you're in their home, you have to be obedient to what they say, unless they're asking you to do something immoral, unethical, or illegal. Other than that, you have to. Why? Because they are the God-ordained authorities in the life of a child. Okay? And God wants his people, his children, to get used to obeying him by obeying them. Show me a child who obeys parents, and I'll show you a child who doesn't have as much trouble obeying God. Show me a child who rebels against parents, and I'll show you a child who has trouble obeying God. It's corollary. There's all this corollary. They submit to their parents, less problem submitting to God. They understand lines, they understand authority. God-ordained authority. It's there in the home with the parents over the children. Corollary, I mentioned one in Facebook. Show me a person who mistreats animals, and I'll show you a person who mistreats people. Show me a person who treats animals with kindness, they probably treat people with kindness. Generally speaking, all things being even, all things being equal. But show me a child who rebels against their parents, and we have a lot of that. We have a lot of children rebelling against their parents. Who needs authority? Who needs people telling me what to do? God says, I do. I put them there. I gave you into their life, and they're there to guide you, to educate you, to protect you, to do all the things that you need to bring you to the person that you need to be. And when you rebel against them, then there's going to be problems. And then the flip side of honor your father and mother is that when you're in their house, that you obey them. The other part of honor your father and mother is that when you're outside of the home, that you provide for them with food, clothing, and shelter. That's how you honor them, by making sure that they have food, clothing, and shelter in their later years. That's what they did for you on the front end, by the way. They gave you food, clothing, and shelter, hopefully. That's the hope. So, lines of authority are built into the fabric. And when you resist that authority, then you're resisting God. You're not resisting, people think, well, I'm resisting parents. Well, yeah, you are to some extent, but you're also resisting God-ordained authority. So, that can create problems. It does create problems. And we have a generation that has, that says, who needs I'll be my own authority. I don't need authority. I'll tell you what, you get into, I was thinking about this. Every kid goes through phases where you want to buck authority. Test the authorities to see, So I remember being, you want to test. Everybody wants to have that moment where you, I found it fascinating. I went into the Army Reserve. And I seldom talk about this, but I went to the Army Reserve, and I tell you, you go to boot camp, and you talk about people telling you what to do, up in your face telling you what to do, when to get up, when to eat, what to eat, how to dress. Everything about your life is regimented. It's all about authority. And they own you for the time that you're there. So, if you have trouble with authority, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So, you learn very quickly that things do what you're told, and it'll go a whole lot better. I agree. I think that it will probably never happen because of our country, but one of the things I like about Israel, one of the things I love about Israel is that boys are required upon graduation, unless they get an exemption, and girls have to serve 2 years and guys have to serve 3 in the Army. And you learn discipline. You learn respect for authority. And it's funny because some of these kids are like, I find it funny, both in America and in Israel, they're like, well, I got tired of my parents telling me what to do, so I joined the military. Oh, that's good. Good thinking there. Yeah, because they'll never tell you what to do. They'll never. Man, oh my stars. I'll relate one incident. Boot camp. So I talked with Drill Sergeant Burton. Drill Sergeant Burton was a big black man, big arms, huge arms. And he and I had some really good conversations at night because he would be on CQ, and he found out that I had been to Bible college, had gone to Bible college, so we'd have these talks about faith. But Burton was he was crazy, man. He was just crazy. He said to us, the group, our guys, our 50 guys, he said, if any of y'all want to take me on, you just let me know. Now the first swing is yours, but I get everyone after that. And I thought to myself, who would take this guy on? I mean, he's huge. Okay. So we were doing boot camp during the summer. It was hotter than Sheol in Oklahoma. It was over 100 degrees every day. People falling out because of lack of water. We had 4th of July, so they tell all the guys you can go to the big base-wide party for 4th of July. But here's the kicker. We don't want any of you having any alcohol. Are you kidding me? You got to be kidding me. So it's this big area. And there's beer gardens all over the place. So sure enough, everybody in my unit, except for myself and maybe one other, I knew better. I knew what was going to happen. Everybody drank and everybody got drunk. So they put us back on the bus, bring us back to the barracks, and I knew Burton was going to go off on us. I just knew it. So I didn't. He comes in and he's all nice and kind, and I'm thinking, oh, this is scary. This is not good. He's like, guys, just go to bed. Everything will be fine. We'll all be good. Just get a good night's sleep. And I thought, no, this is not good. So I didn't even take my shirt or my pants off. Or my boots. I just laid on the top of my bunk. I knew what was going to happen. Sure enough, he let everybody get to sleep, or what they're all in a drunken stupor. And then he comes in the building about an hour and a half later, just screaming. I mean, screaming. Like at 1 o'clock in the morning. And he is a tornado. And he has everybody out on the front lawn. He brings everybody out on the front lawn. And now we're going to do PT. PT, which is, physical training, right? And what he does is he has all of us running in place and then hitting the ground. Run in place, hit the ground, jumping jacks, and pretty soon you start to hear to the guy on the right, and then pretty soon the person on the left goes right? And he's going to make sure everybody brings it back up. Right? And he tells them, I told you guys not to drink. What did I tell you? Right? Now you get to pay. Hope it was good, because now it's going to come back. And he just looks at me and winks. And it was like, it's one of those things that I knew. But my point is that there's authority. And they tell you what to do, and they expect you to do it, and when you don't do it, there's consequences. And you learn that there's consequences for this. By the way, another thing you learn in the Army is that when one person screws up, other people get screwed up along the way. Yep. Right. And we've bought into the personal relationship and the personal stuff. It's just me and the Lord. And there is an aspect of that. There's a place for that, to be sure. But we've also missed the communal, corporate side of things that says, we saw this at the end of chapter 12 with Miriam, that the whole camp stayed a week where they were, could not move until she was restored. And you see this throughout the book of Numbers, where, if the community doesn't deal with this rebellion, or God doesn't deal with it, then eventually it stymies the whole community. So you have to be willing to see the corporate communal side as well. That there is a responsibility that I have and that you have to the greater whole. We don't tend to think that way. We tend to think, oh, it's just my issues, my problem. Okay, it doesn't hurt anybody. One of the things we should learn about life, we have to learn about life, is that no, the negative decisions we make have an impact on other people. Yeah, one and then two, and then we got to go. Yeah, it's... Yeah, good word. All right, Bill. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he mentions that we're a body. There's different parts of the body. But the body has to function as one. And that if a part of the body becomes hurt, then that renders the whole body at times, difficult to deal with. It's like if you drop something on your foot, the mouth screams and the head goes, ah. All the parts of the body are connected. So there's this, there is a corporate aspect to it. Yeah, there's, things don't, get to do what they want to on their own, but there is some of that, but there's also a corporate side to it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, good word. Good word. All right, please stand with me for the Elenu on page 95. Page 95 for the Elenu. Elenu l'shapea keod leadon hakol la ted gedulala yotzer breshit shelo asano kirgoye haratzot velo samanu kemishpakot hadama shelo sam kalkenu kahem vigor aleinu kekohamonam V'yanaknu korim u'mishtakavim u'modim lifnei melech malkei hamalkim hakadosh baruch hu bayom hahu yihyeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad. Together in English, we are duty bound to praise the Master of all.